2016 Ram 2500 Laramie, the 6.4 HEMI. I keep getting a P1456 code, which says fuel tank pressure sensor circuit low voltage. Now this is a typical 3-sensor pressure or 3-wire pressure sensor. I'm going to try to make this as fast as possible, explain all this. Basically, what you have, here's your sensor right there. Okay, let me turn my light on so that I can get you some light. That's your sensor right there. As you can see, the blue and pink wire right here is your main, that's your 5-volt reference. The middle wire, which is the blue and orange, is your signal wire, which goes over the PCM. The other wire, which is blue and white, is your ground. Computer controls ground and 5-volt reference. Now the sensor goes right here. That's where the sensor goes. The sensor sitting here. I pulled it out just so I can make it easier for testing purposes, but this slips in there. As you can see, I have my T-pins into my wires, the blue and pink and the blue and orange. That's going to be 5-volt reference and your signal. Now this system, there's 2 types of systems that vehicles have. I mean, this is a typical 3-wire pressure sensor. It's very easy to test. You can actually test it. There is, this here is your flow chart, which is garbage. You know, we don't need that. This is going to be easy. We could test the whole circuit system. We're going to do a circuit integrity test. The whole system will be tested right here within a few seconds. I'm going to explain this a little bit to you though. So, as you can see, I have a P1456 code. And we're going to go pull up the scope and show you what I get on the scope. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Okay. Here on the scope, I'm trying to turn this up some so I can try to zoom in here better too for you. What you want to focus on, basically the yellow trace, which is this line here, is my 5-volt reference. As you can see, it's at 0.01. Now the ignition is on right now. The green wire is my signal. It's at 0.09. Now your signal wire, your 5-volt reference should always be 5 volts. It should never, ever, ever drop out unless you have an issue. Your signal wire should never be below 0.5 volts. Your signal wire is going to reference from 0.5 to 4.5 volts. So I'm going to disconnect the. Let me move this yellow wire. Actually, I'll move both. Nah. See, this is where it's going to get interesting. No, that's what I want. Okay. All right, I'll leave that like that. That should be good enough. Now you're going to see, I'm going to disconnect the sensor. Now, this integrity test, what it's going to show, I should have 5 volts. The yellow wire should have 5 volts all the time. The green wire will fluctuate depending on pressure inside the tank from 0.5 volts to 4.5 volts. Never, as you see here, I'm at 0.09. It should never be that low. You can test the whole system. We know, since we have a circuit low code, we know our ground wire is fine because the ground is actually what pulls that circuit low. So we're getting ground, so we don't even have to bother testing the ground. If we had a circuit too high code, then we would be more concerned with the ground wire. Because if the circuit's too high, we know power's good. That means we have our 5 volt. Circuit's too low, hey, guess what? That means we have ground. So I'm going to disconnect the sensor, and you're going to see what happens. There you go. Disconnected the sensor. My 5 volt reference went up to 4.99 volts. My signal wire, which is green, went up to 4.87. I'm going to plug it back in. 1.56, 1.50. Now the green wire right now, it's working, because before it was always at like below 0.2 volts, always. Unless I unplugged it, and then it would shoot up. I have another video and I could show you that. So the sensor, and actually the funny thing is, after I got done testing this the other day, determined that the sensor was bad, I had to order the sensor. I cleared the code and everything. The code was out for 2 days. Finally, this afternoon, actually did come back on. So, when disconnected again, look where I'm at, okay? So that there tells me the wiring is absolutely fine. There's no wiring issue at all in here. Let me see if I'll pull my green trace down. That way I'll get that in view. There we go. So that tells you wiring is great. As you can see, my green trace up here, which is at 5 volts. You look over here, you see I'm at 5 volts here, and the yellow, I'm at 5 volts here. You guess, probably can't see the yellow. Yellow here, 5 volts. And obviously you can tell right here. I'm at 5 volts on both of those. So here's the new sensor. Okay, well, here's the old sensor. Okay. Here's the old sensor. Here is the new sensor. I'm gonna plug the new sensor and let's see what happens. As you can see, new sensor is plugged in. My voltage, my yellow wire, which is my 5 volt reference, it's still sitting at 5 volts. That's what it should be. I'm at 4.98 volts. And 2.5 on the sensor. Now I'm gonna disconnect this again. I'm gonna plug the old one back in. That's disconnected. I'm up to 5 volts, which is what I should be. Old sensor in. Look where I'm at now. 0.38 and 1.50. The sensor's bad. My yellow wire should never change. It should be at 5 volts. That's your 5 volt reference. Put the old one back in. Look. And now the green wire, obviously, like I explained, that's your signal wire. That will change depending on pressure inside the thing. Obviously now I don't have any pressure in my tank because I actually have my sensor disconnected. I was just doing this for reference. See, I have my T-taps, my T-pins in there. I actually soldered wires on them, so that way it makes it easier to connect my scope up to it. So, there you see, look, my temperature, my pressure went down. Oh, and this is the way this works. Higher the pressure in the tank, the lower the voltage on this green wire. Higher the pressure, lower voltage. So, that's why I lost connection. So, remember that. That's it. I mean, that by disconnecting that, literally, you can check the whole system. I mean, that's your flow chart. I mean, you have 10, 15 steps in there. Take you 10 minutes, and you need a scan tool to do it. But like in my case, my scan tool, the new update doesn't come out until April, so I'm only good to 2015 models. So I couldn't even test this with my scan tool. But there you have it. I mean, we literally did a whole wiring integrity test and the sensor. I mean, we proved the sensor was bad. The sensor was shorting out. That's why that's why I was getting the P1456 code. So easy as that. And literally the sensor takes all of 10 seconds to replace. I'll actually show you how this gets replaced. Okay, this goes in. See, there's a hole there. Goes in and then just slits around like that. In this whole situation, there's, I guess I should have said something earlier. There's two separate systems, computer systems, not on this vehicle, but on other vehicles. On this vehicle, you have a standard 5-volt reference. All it does is send 5-volt, or no, I'm sorry, take that back. On this system, you have actually a resistor between the 5-volt reference, which is your sensor FD, and the sensor SIG, which is your signal. There's actually a resistor inside the PCM that connects those two, this driver to this signal wire. That's why whenever the sensor was disconnected, actually it's in the PCM here and here. This is the PCM and this is PCM. They're both one. They're just showing two different views for the wiring. There's a sensor, or there's a resistor in there that goes from one to the other. And what it does is actually, that's why when I disconnected it, it was showing 5 volts with it disconnected on both the signal wire and the 5-volt reference. Most vehicles, older vehicles especially, you won't have that. The signal wire is a dedicated signal wire. Now that 5-volt reference, or that 5-volt signal on that signal wire, or 5-volt on that signal wire, will do absolutely nothing when that ground is connected, when that sensor is connected. Basically, all that is, that's a open circuit sensing wire. What it does, it allows the computer to know if that wire is ever open, is whether if the plug is disconnected or the wire gets cut somewhere, and that wire becomes open, it's going to show 5 volts on it, because it's going to show the 5 volts feeding through the resistor inside the PCM. A lot of older vehicles, they didn't have that. So all it was a standalone signal wire. So all it did was send a signal back. So if it was unplugged, that wire would read nothing. It would read 0. So on here, if we would have unplugged it, and it was an older, I don't want to say older style system, because it's not really older, because there's a lot of cars that still use it today. But if there was when you unplugged it, the yellow wire, which is our 5-volt signal, would go up to 5 volt. The green wire would drop down to absolutely nothing. It would just read absolutely open, no voltage, nothing, no ground, nothing. So it would just read 0. But on this system, because it has that resistor inside the PCM to feed for that, and all it is it's just there to show a feed if that circuit is ever open. That way the PCM knows that the circuit is open. And what it'll do is, it'll set a code in there for the fuel tank pressure sensor circuit open. And that's all that wire is for, as far as I know. That's all it's for. It's just so the computer knows that wire is ever open, whether it's disconnected, whether the sensor becomes disconnected, or like I said, if the wire is cut. Now if the wire is grounded out, it'll read 0 all the time. So that's why these were both reading 5 volts when I had them unplugged, because this wire actually gets power through the PCM on this wire, but only if it is open, because once it's connected, it's only going to read whatever the sensor is putting out, because of that ground wire, and it just cancels out that extra power. The other system, like I said, if you disconnected the wire and it didn't have the internal resistor on that driver or on that regulated circuit, it would show it as 0. So then that's when you would have to do, what you would do in that case is you would have to run an ohm resistance test from unplug the circuit or unplug the connector. You'll have to check resistance between here and at the PCM. Disconnect the connector at the PCM and check for resistance. And that'll tell you whether your problem is indeed the sensor, or if it's an open circuit in that signal wire going to the PCM, or if it's grounded somewhere. So, all right, just a heads up.